Rent control has been banned in Washington state since 1981, more than 40 years. But the current state legislature wants to ignore that state rent control ban and put in place a rent cap. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of Washington state. And as I've mentioned many times before, Washington state is not a good place to be a landlord, okay? Specifically Seattle, but the whole state of Washington, they have some of the most anti-landlord, anti-property rights laws in the entire country, okay? It's like they want to win the prize for treating people like they don't have any property rights. That's my personal opinion, okay? They seem to be in a battle with California on who can be the most socialist, who can take away your property and then give it to the government the quickest. And right now what they're doing is they're trying to pass a rent control law. Okay, anyone with any common sense, knowing the definition of rent control, can look at this law and say, yeah, that is 100% rent control, right? But they are trying to pass it off as something else because there's already a ban of rent control within the state, supposedly, right? So, it's a complete joke. It's a complete joke, and it just goes to show you the lengths that these tenant rights groups, these, socialist politicians will go in order to get around the law, okay? They don't care about the law. They will ignore the Constitution of not just their state, but of the entire country in order to get their way. And they will impose upon people something that is so bad that it will destroy the economy of places where it's put in place. I mean, we've seen the result of rent control in other places before, and yet they keep looking at, oh, this is a good idea. This is a good idea. It'll work this time. The way we're going to implement it, it's going to work. No, it will not. It will not work. And I'm going to tell you exactly why as we go through the article. But before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. So I want you to tell me your opinions of rent control down in the comments, okay? If you deal with rent control now in the state that you're living in, by any name, I mean, some places they call it rent stabilization. It's the same thing. We know what it is, okay? We're not morons. I hate that, in places like New York, oh, no, this isn't rent control. This is rent stabilization. Same thing, okay? Or in California, they got some kind of statewide rent cap. That's rent control too, okay? It's an artificial cap put on a price of something by the government. That's rent control. And they're trying to use different names or different little strategies in order to trick people into believing that it's something that it's not, okay? And believe me, it is exactly what that is, and it will have the same awful effects on everything that the classic rent control does. It might take a little bit longer, but believe me, it will happen. So anyway, let me get into the article. I want to read you details about this proposed rent control law in Washington state. This article is coming from mynorthwest.com, and it says, legislature considers rent increase cap, but don't call it rent control. Yeah, even the article, the people who wrote the article even know, yeah, don't call it rent control because they know what it really is. But anyway, let's get into it. State lawmakers in Olympia heard emotional testimony Thursday delivered in front of a packed committee hearing room regarding capping rent increases to 5% annually. House Bill 2114 would put limits on late fee increases and provide other tenant safeguards. This legislation is not rent control, the bill sponsor, Representative Emily Alvarado, Democrat from Seattle, told members of the House Housing Committee. Under this bill, rent increases are capped at 5% every 12 months, Alvarado said. But when a person voluntarily vacates a unit, the landlord is able to reset the rent. So the person made a statement and it said, now this isn't rent control, but we're going to cap rents. Like, what? Like, you're not fooling us. You're not fooling anybody, okay? You're speaking out of both sides of your mouth. It's a bunch of garbage. Yes, it is rent control. Stop lying. The fact that you even made the statement, is you trying to convince people of something that you know yourself to not be true. That's how idiotic it is. You said right there, they want to cap rent increases at 5% every 12 months, right? So if a landlord has a long-term tenant, they would be capped at a 5% rent increase as long as that tenant is in the property, right? But then they say, oh, when a person voluntarily vacates, a landlord is able to reset the rent. So what do you think that would encourage landlords to do? Okay, and in places where this sort of vacancy decontrol exists, this is what happens, right? Landlords are encouraged to remove those tenants as quickly as possible so that they can raise the rent to the market levels. So rather than the person, paying the market rate rents and being allowed to stay, the landlord actually will push to evict the tenant who otherwise would not have been evicted. Okay, that is one of the negatives of that. And as soon as this law passes, believe me, they're going to try to amend this law to remove that little provision that allows vacancy decontrol. Okay, that's my personal belief. Every time they put a law into place, right, they're like, oh, we're going to allow this to happen, right? Remember, they're pushing their limits. They slowly change the law, modify the law, make little tiny changes until it becomes what they want it to be, which is full on, rent control with no exceptions. The rent stays the same even after the tenant moves out. They can't raise the rents up to the market rates. That's what they truly want. And even going beyond that, they want the government to be able to eventually take over the housing. That's my belief, okay? I believe that they want the government to own all housing. They want a socialist system put into place. They don't want landlords to be able to make any money. They believe that it is wrong for anyone to own property. That's what socialists believe. So yeah, they are the ones pushing for this garbage. And, they would be the same ones to say, well, why are there no repairs to my building? Why is this building falling apart? Why is the landlord unable to do updates to the building? Well, you cap the rents at a 5% increase. So what is the motivation for the landlord to be able to do any of that stuff? How is the landlord going to be able to do any of that stuff when they don't make any money? They're not. They're just simply put not going to be able to do that. They're going to cut costs the maximum amount possible by slow rolling repairs, by slow rolling updates, only doing what is absolutely required by the law to keep the building up, livable, right? And that's it. Don't expect to have, you'll be up in buildings and, they wouldn't have been updated since the 1970s. That's what we see up in New York. Places are literally dilapidated and falling apart. And the only saving grace for the tenants living in those places is, I got cheap rent. Yeah, well, this is what your cheap rent pays for. You get to live in shambles. The state legislature banned rent control in 1981, but that hasn't stopped attempts since then to put some sort of cap on raising rates, calling such legislation rent stabilization. A similar measure stalled during the 2023 session and never made it to a floor vote to either the House or Senate. Landlords told us that last year's bill was complicated, combining the banking of rent and pegging to CPI, saying it was hard to track and it was not predictable, Alvarado told the committee. That's why we have a flat 5% cap in this legislation. We also heard that it was important to continue to exempt new construction. Yeah, they exempt new construction, but that basically screws over 99% of people, because there's very little new construction in a place like Washington State where it's so expensive to build. Oh man, so all the landlords there would be stuck under this 5% cap, and it doesn't matter who you exempt. It's going to hurt a lot of really small landlords who do not have the money to keep up with their repairs, their maintenance, their costs just increasing. One of the biggest increases I had this year was insurance costs. I had to completely drop my old insurance company and sign up for a new one because it was costing me thousands of dollars more. Thousands. and ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I haven't had any claims, nothing changed about what I was doing, but of course the insurance company, their costs increased too. Like everything, it goes from level to level, down, and it's like, hey, at the top level, we got nationwide inflation, so the cost of everything is increasing. The cost of labor, the cost of materials, the cost of supplies, and it is passed on. The businesses I use, they pass the cost on to me. And me being a business, and my real estate business, I have to pass the cost on to my customer, who is the tenant. So yeah, it's unfortunate. Do I wish that it was that way? No. But that is the way of the world. That is the way the free markets work. And simply put, trying to create an artificial market, artificial prices, keep this price low, you keep one price low, right? And the reaction of the market is that the price of something else has to increase to compensate for that lower cost. So, just as an example, you have, let's say, we're going to keep the cost of rent low, right? Well, landlords, they will start to find other ways to make up for that by charging, maybe they're going to charge you for parking at your next apartment. Maybe they're going to charge you for, what do they call it, valet gas or valet trash service. The costs that we are, we can't increase, we are forced to find other ways to make up for that loss, okay? And so people, they don't really save the money they think they're going to save. But anyway, I'm going to put a link to the article describing this new rent control proposal. My hope is that the people in Washington State, like they said, they've proposed this stuff for the last few years. It hasn't passed, it hasn't gone anywhere. I hope it doesn't go anywhere this year either, because this is a horrible idea.